Have Hoyo actually fixed their storytelling problems? For years, I felt the Genshin story had potential, but was held back by a myriad of mistakes. Things improved over time, and from Sumeru onwards, it's been pretty decent overall, with some brilliant moments where everything came together, but for me those high points often just highlighted how frustrating the rest could be. Many disagreed with me in many different ways. Some loved the way they scattered their lore throughout the world, treating it as a puzzle for people to find and piece together for themselves. Others felt that any improvements were surface level at best and the story wasn't worth their time. I can sympathize with those perspectives and more, and had some fun discussions on my videos exploring all of this. But imagine my surprise when Hoyo did a special live stream where they highlighted so many of the things I'd been complaining about and promised to fix them in Nod Krai. We're now 6 acts into the new region, more than enough to tell whether anything is different. Did they keep their promise? I'll avoid spoilers for Acts 5 and 6, and will give a warning before the couple of sections where I mention anything from them, but anything from Acts 1 to 4 are fair game. Any story's opening has to lure you in, to show some spark which makes you want to find out more. The best stories shower you with questions at a digestible pace, the need for answers compels you, and before you know it, you're hooked. Genshin has always been hit and miss at this for me. Some quests caught my interest from the start, but just as often it took a while to find a reason to care. And even when I did, there were usually only 1 or 2 driving forces behind each one, especially in the earlier nations. I didn't mind, since everything but the story hooked me in. The world, the music, the combat, and the idyllic sense of freedom. The hooks have been getting better over time, but by the time you reach the more recent regions, you're either in it for the long haul or ignoring the story pretty much entirely. I'd have said the hooks were largely irrelevant as a result and didn't expect much improvement. Instead, Nod Krai's opening planted so many captivating questions that it almost got overwhelming, and even better, it started giving us answers even in our earliest conversations. Take the early question about the moon goddess's identity, for example. Lauma tells us about Kultar, which instantly planted the question, was that Columbina before she joined the Fatui? Even though the answer was obvious, I half expected them to drag this question out for an entire quest, where we spend an hour or 2 figuring out the obvious answer is indeed the truth. Instead, a mere 10 minutes later, the moment we meet the damselette, she straight up tells us both those names are hers. But that's not all. Her enigmatic remarks sparked even more intriguing questions. If neither is her true name, then who is she really? Why does the mere mention of the Fatui make her angry? What happened between her and the Frostmoon Science? A clear and prompt answer, and more intriguing questions? I could barely believe it. They also mixed different types of hook as well. Some touched on things we've known for years, many pointed at immediate surface level conflict, others focused on the recent history or even deeper lore, still more centered on deeper character conflicts. From the first moment, I needed answers to so many questions. This was an absolutely fantastic start. One of the biggest problems with Hoyo's storytelling is their tendency to ramble. Ideas which could be conveyed in a single sentence take paragraphs, then 10 seconds later they're repeated by another character just in case you missed it. It's akin to slop content, stories designed for people who are only half paying attention, who need that repetition because they aren't really listening. Ironically, even if that was not the original intent, bloated writing makes players become less attentive and more likely to zone out, which starts a vicious cycle where now the writers need to write like that, since that's how the audience are interacting with the game. I prefer games with rich, emotional stories which trust the player to connect the dots. Genshin's avalanche of dialogue always made me just a little less engaged. It's been pretty jarring to get used to a world where Genshin's dialogue is often short and to the point. They set themselves a difficult challenge. Previously, the Archon quest would be fairly linear narrative with occasional lore drops, and most character depth and world building was left to character stories and world quests respectively. In Nod Krai, they've combined all 3, and they're giving far more lore than ever before. They could have kept the same approach and made each Archon quest dozens of hours long, but thankfully they did not. Instead, each scene needs to do more, and it's so much more engaging. It's still far from perfect, with Act 2 in particular starting off a little slow, and in a few places they fell back into that bad habit of repeating things we literally just learned. But where that had been half the dialogue in previous regions, it was rare enough in Nod Krai that it actually stood out. I wish they'd at least make these recaps optional. Have a character ask a question and let the player choose either I'll explain later or I'm feeling a bit lost too, and only show the recap if you say you need it. Despite that still happening on occasion, the improvements to the dialogue make it almost feel like a different game. Another area I'd often wanted more from Genshin was their environmental storytelling. Teyvat is gorgeous, but they don't always tie each region's design to the story being told. Inazuma, for example, was great. The entire region felt hostile and devastated by war, which resonated with the themes of the story. Meanwhile, Fontaine screamed of a sharp divide between the upper class, who lived in idyllic valleys or the shining city, and the rest who toiled in the bleak industrial underground, yet this aspect was irrelevant to the main narrative. Of course, just because something exists in the world doesn't mean they have to use it, but the experience as a whole is better when they do, so I'm always disappointed when they don't. One of the central conflicts in Nod Krai, both past and present, is the Fatui trying to impose their will on the peoples who lived in the region before they came rolling in. This is central to the world design. There's a vivid contrast between the pristine wilderness and crumbling ruins of Hisi Island, and the uncompromising subjugation of nature imposed by the Fatui's base, which dominates their shattered land. This conflict is the driving force in much of the story too, so everything feels more cohesive and grounded in the environment itself. And that's just one example. There's so much more like that, but this was something they've done well in the past, so I can't say I've been surprised. Meanwhile, one aspect I had zero faith they would improve was their use of subtext. Subtext is any meaning hidden in the dialogue which is not stated directly. It adds depth, tension, and emotional resonance to any story when it's present, and lack of subtext makes dialogue feel shallow and overly explicit. To use it well, the writers kinda need to trust that people are paying attention, so Hoyo seemed to avoid it like the plague outside of some rare moments. To my astonishment, this has finally changed in Nod Krai. Our conversation with Dory at the start of the first act is the perfect example. It was basically one big info dump introducing the factions in the region, but instead of just listing out the facts about each group, everything Dory said was very biased and filtered through her perspective. She's curious about what secrets the Fatui are hiding in their mysterious facility. She dismisses the Frostmoon Scions because they're not materialistic. She's skeptical of the Lightkeepers because she cannot comprehend someone doing work for free. She warns you not to talk to the Curatorium of Secrets because she sees them as her competition and doesn't want to lose your business. This brought her to life and made the conversation entertaining, and since you know her, you can see through all the bias to find hints at what to expect. Infinitely more engaging than just being told, this group are like this, the other group are like that. Much of the dialogue is still fairly surface level, but use of subtext was much more noticeable throughout Nod Krai, including some of my favorite moments. My two favorite examples come from Acts 5 and 6, so if you haven't played them yet, skip to the timestamp on the screen. First, this moment with Columbina in her incorporeal form walking through the Traveler. She clearly hopes that her friendship with us will mean that we at least sense something. When nothing happens, she has a heartbreaking moment of disappointment and despair, followed by joy when we do turn around and call her name. Her hope rekindled, she decides to tag along with us. So much heart from such a fleeting moment. And second, Nefer and Lauma's verbal sparring later on. Nefer's always pretty spiky, but it's so fun to see Lauma biting back. Since Nefer is her friend, she understands that this is her way to show affection. Their bickering shows their comfort with each other and lets Lauma show a side of herself which rarely sees the light of day. And Columbina watching, learning, understanding that perhaps the Harbingers might have cared more for her than she ever dared to hope. These moments were everywhere and often subtly set up expectations which were paid off later on. I think this, more than any of the other improvements, is why I've enjoyed Nod Krai so much. Cinematography is one area where Genshin's progress has been steady and obvious over the years. Early on, the cinematography for in-game dialogue was underwhelming and the cinematics were a little basic, but over time they began using more dynamic angles and introducing movement to make scenes more alive and engaging, and the quality of the cutscenes steadily improved. By the time we went to Natlan, the cinematics were incredible, and they kept adding more fluid animations even in the in-engine cutscenes, which brought things to life even more. This is even better in Nod Krai, and it's been great to see this moving further in the right direction. These subtle touches make the characters feel more at home in their surroundings, more relaxed and natural during conversations, and it makes it so much easier to become immersed in the story. Genshin's still far behind some more modern competition when it comes to the in-game animation, but they're slowly closing that gap. At this point, the one thing I want the most is more animated cutscenes, since they're always absolutely brilliant, especially now that they're mixing 2D and 3D animation together. In past regions, I always felt that while some lucky characters had depth in either the Archon quest or their own story, many were shallow even there, and for the most part, missed potential was the general theme. Some did show some genuine growth, while others were made more interesting through a slow reveal of their inner self. On occasion, they'd focus on a static character's changing relationships to make them feel engaging even when their essence remained untouched, but for many, they didn't even bother doing that. Anytime I delved into a character's profile and read some of their history, their potential became crystal clear. Each one has the seeds of a great story within them. They were just so rarely given the time and space required to let that story bloom. This may be the place where Nod Krai's approach has made the most obvious difference, but the execution has actually been a little mixed for me. Lauma's story felt incredibly well integrated, and her genuine character growth was deftly given contrast and context via the comparison to how Wilhelmina handled the same situation. This was a perfect example of how it should be done. In contrast, Flynn's was a little disappointing for me. The section where we got a little backstory for him was just as smoothly integrated as Lauma's, but I was left feeling like we didn't get to know him all that well, like this was just an introduction. My hope there is he gets some more time in the spotlight in upcoming patches, since for now he's still a bit of an enigma, though I guess maybe that could be intentional. Nefer's story was well done in and of itself, but it felt very out of place, and compared to how well the first two had been integrated, I was surprised that they didn't do this better. I wish they'd interwoven the exploration of Rerir and Nefer's histories together instead of putting them one after another. Imagine starting to explore Rerir's memories only to find out just a couple of scenes in that he had noticed our inspection. The narrative would become a back and forth with Nefer and Rerir wrestling for control over the board, exploring Nefer's memories when Rerir has the upper hand, and then returning to Rerir when Nefer finds her strength, all building towards the same confrontation at the climax. The story itself was good, and Rerir is a great villain, but I think a different presentation could have landed better. But the absolute pinnacle of Nod Krai's characterization so far has to be Columbina. She was the harbinger I was least interested in, but from the moment we met her, I found her captivating. I was skeptical about the Selenic chronicles being spaced out artificially, but our weekly interaction built up our growing friendship with her in such an organic way. And as the later acts focused on her more and more, she became an absolute delight. All that groundwork in the earlier acts and the chronicles built her into a complex character I genuinely care for. So I was absolutely riveted by everything in Acts 5 and 6, and now I need the next chapter in a way I haven't felt for years. And I haven't even mentioned the complex and nuanced web of relationships between the characters in Nod Krai, which themselves shift and grow throughout. As far as group dynamics go, they've finally recaptured the heights of Sumeru for me, and I could not be happier. An even bigger complaint I've had since I started Genshin is the disconnect between the story and the lore. Tevat is filled with complex web of deeper lore, rich with symbolism and subtle hints, scattered across the world for enterprising loreologists to collect and analyze and theorize about. For me, collecting shards of information and cross-referencing clues to piece together a hidden story feels far too much like work to be appealing. I've always been glad this depth exists, but even more glad that others enjoy putting it together and sharing their theories with the rest of us, since that meant I didn't have to. However, I know from experience with other media that if the main narrative connects to these hidden depths, I can find myself slowly sucked into the deeper theories over time. If you can get me interested in the lore first, then all of the effort involved in hunting it down becomes invisible, and I can get really into it. I love it when that happens. I always wished Genshin would bridge that gap so that people like me could get into it as well, but the barrier for entry was always far too steep. So, wow, does Nod Krai flip that on its head? I feel like everything we do is truly connected to the inner workings of the world and the distant past which set events in motion. Answers to our question come freely and lead to even more intriguing hints at further depths which make me feel that need to find out more. This is exactly what I'd always felt was missing, the ingredient to their stories which they could have given to us, but which they had just held back for no apparent reason. Now that they've put it in the Archon quest, the entire experience feels so much richer. They have taken it too far in a couple of places. For example, Sandroni flat out dropping all that Narcissus and Kreutz lore was out of place. But if they can avoid such blatant info dumps, then this is genuinely impressive change of approach. Another area where Genshin often struggled is in exploring themes. Themes give stories deeper meanings, and strong narratives weave them through characters, conflicts, and the world itself. Genshin frequently introduced compelling ideas, but held back from fully engaging with them, especially in the Archon quests. Liyue is the clearest example for me. A nation built around the concept of contract, duty, and the tension between mortals and immortals, and yet the implications of Zhongli's actions are barely questioned, and the sweeping societal changes they trigger feel oddly inconsequential on an individual level. Nod Krai feels like a big step in the right direction here as well. For me, the strongest themes are identity, belonging, and community, and every step along the way has explored them from different angles and in different ways. Lauma's identity is built upon a lie, and while she feels deeply connected to her community, the lie weighs down on her until she can make her decision to change her people's path. Flint has to hide his identity in order to gain acceptance in the community he holds dear. Nefer rejects her childhood tribe entirely, builds her sense of self upon the ashes of her enemies, and forges her own community in a new land far away from home. Rari's story explores the darker side of all of this, which led directly to the devastating consequences which set him on the path to become the monster that he is today. And, of course, Columbina's story takes this further than any other. This was not an aspect of their storytelling that Hoyo even mentioned when they talked about the things they intend to improve, so all of this has been a huge surprise. I guess, in retrospect, previous regions did have some common threads across their stories, and perhaps they failed to land because of all the other problems instead. Another big critique I've often shared is that Genshin's quests often feel like they lack consequences. Many do create lasting changes for the characters, but even the stronger arcs avoid showing meaningful effects on the world itself. World quests regularly change the landscape, so why can't Archon quests do the same, even if it's temporary? They still don't really do this in Nod Krai. There are a handful of notable changes, such as the water under the Fatui base being blasted away, but I still wish there'd be some segment of the story which would leave half the nation infested with the wild hunt for a week or two, to give an example. However, I think they found a better way to address this kind of feedback. Spoilers for Act 6 here, so if you haven't played it yet, skip to the timestamp on screen. I think it's great that the solutions we found to the challenges in the earlier acts caused the problems we faced in the later ones. We encouraged Lauma to share the truth about the Frost Moon with her people, but that weakened Columbina's waning connection to the world. We collected the two Marrows and brought them into contact with the Moon Goddess, triggering the Trilunar Syzygy, which Dottore wanted to exploit, which led to Columbina's sacrifice. These narrative consequences were really well done, but when you really get down to it, what this particular critique says is that when the everyday gameplay of the world remains the same after a cataclysmic event, it makes that event feel less impactful than it should have been. Right now, I can't do anything in the game without being reminded that Columbina is not there. Over the past 3 months, I've got used to paying her a visit every week, and sometimes even headed over there to listen to the ambience on other days as well. They took their time building our friendship with her, and the fact it took so long made it feel far more meaningful, far more real. It made everything that happened in the story truly hit home. And now, whenever I look at the map, I see her little icon and I see that it's greyed out. It reminds me of what we've lost. This wasn't quite what I asked for, but it's exactly what I wanted. And finally, another major, long-standing complaint about their storytelling is that it's ridiculous that they ever add important lore and character development into time-limited events. As someone who started in version 2, for years the only reason I knew the sky is a lie was that other players told me. For anyone who didn't have that help, I'd imagine that the moment when Mawika punched a hole in the sky itself would have been more than a little confusing. Unlike previous years, Natlan's summer event was made permanently available, so there's a chance they'll finally fix this problem. I found it interesting that Nod Krai's Moon Festival was embedded into the Archon quest directly, but I guess we won't know for sure until they reveal this year's Lantern Rite. I hope it's made permanent. I wish they'd go make all past events available as optional downloads, or at least the stories from the major ones. I still miss the Golden Apple Archipelago, and it's sad that new players miss out on so many fantastic stories. It's beyond time for Hoyo to fix this. A year ago, I posted a video exploring these same points, listing out exactly why I felt Hoyo needed to make big changes to their storytelling. I had been very happy with the first few acts of Natlan's Archon quest and saw many signs of improvement which gave me hope, but the interlude brought back all my long-standing concerns. The final act, which followed, left me massively disappointed, but Natlan's events and world quests slowly made up for that. But even so, that livestream announcing Nod Krai seemed too good to be true. I was glad to hear them acknowledge the problems, but I couldn't quite believe that the changes they promised would actually make a difference. I guess that's the result of years of playing a game which has potential but refuses to implement obvious improvements which would make it so much better. I'm amazed that they actually did these things. Of course, it isn't perfect, and they sometimes fall back into the same old mistakes, but to see any change feels surreal. And even though I've been begging for these specific improvements for so long, it still blows my mind how big a difference this all makes. Nod Krai's Archon quests have been fantastic, and I cannot wait for more. And all of this is why it's so important to give honest critique whenever you find fault with something you love. While I doubt anyone at Hoyo saw my videos specifically, the existence of that kind of discussion in the community at large will have been something they're aware of, and it will have been a major motivation for them to actually make things better. If they can maintain this level of storytelling quality, then perhaps even those who doubted the game will find themselves drawn back in. It may seem long overdue to some, but better late than never. The changes they made so far have been phenomenal, and I could not be happier with the direction of the story. Long may it continue. Until next time.